role to play. And sometimes we have to coordinate with the enemy, but just to get that last little bit, because the power system planners have to keep the lights on 99.999% of the time. Right? What's your advice for us?
By the way, I think it's more than 99.999, because as we electrify everything, it gets really, really ugly if we have a power cut. So I don't know what the right number is, but when the ambulances are electric, and the heating for the old people is electric, and the payment system is electric, etc., I think we really, really need to up our game on resilience. That's just a couple of thoughts on that. In terms of working with the energy modelers, and going back to the Ever example, what I said was producers, you need to standardize, make it easy for them to integrate what you do into the models. And I think the wind industry that's probably largely done. I think the modelers kind of know, but definitely make it user-friendly to model using, integrating wind. Because if you've got, and there's enough nuances, higher hub heights and better fit to terrain and all those sorts of things. Just make it really easy for them to have confidence that you will continue to get cheaper and so on. Actually, the second point is get cheaper. Having said all that about value, I think that there is no question that the focus on cost reduction just has to be relentless and continuing. Consolidation. I just came over from the other part of the program, the Global Renewables Alliance, and one of the things is diversification of the supply chain. And I know we have our Chinese colleagues in the room. I think it's phenomenal what China has achieved. There's no question that it's phenomenal, and I have total respect and also respect and gratitude for that. But dependency on one country, any country, is a risk, and it's getting a pushback. And I think that that's something. I think diversifying the supply chain is not something that only the West should be banging on about. I think it is very much in China's interest also to diversify the supply chain. And that doesn't mean stepping back, but that means responsibly diversifying locations of manufacturing or sourcing of minerals all the way through, and doing that as a partnership. I don't think that. I think China, the Chinese leadership of all sorts in the industry and outside of the industry, I think realizes this, that there's a big exposure. This industry has become very important to China's economy. It's a driver of growth. And so it is a risk to China to build in a potential pushback from other countries, be it US or be it Europe or anywhere. And I think that the world is very open to a closer partnership there, in a way that maybe 2-3 years ago it wasn't. With one other response, so it was about the partnerships, wasn't it? About how to. So go ahead. Rephrase.
Yeah, so it was the uncomfortable partnerships, because we do. In the next 10 years, 15 years, we have to have some kind of gas, some kind of flexible power to come back itself.
Yeah.
Last bits depend on the country.
Yeah.
So what's the best way to work with them?
I was going to say, the final thing I was going to say is we do need to move away from the absolutism. And this is, I'm not talking about your colleagues, but if we look, 1.5 degrees was a sort of glorious adventure. We spent 10 years from Paris to now talking about 1.5 degrees, but without ever really thinking about what it did economically. It was very refreshing, because when you go for net zero, when you say our goal is 80% emissions reduction, then everybody says, I'm all in, but you have to understand I need a 20%. Right? So going to net zero is very important, because it means everybody scrutinizes every bit of emissions. The problem is, what we didn't look at is in the fine print. By the time in 2018 the IPCC came out with its big report on 1.5 degrees, SR15, there was only 12 years to 2030, it was 2018. And what they said was, we need to reduce fossil fuel use by then it was 45% from 10, in other words, more than half in 12 years. That is hundreds of billions, probably trillions of dollars of stranded assets. It was never going to happen. And I said it at the time, it was never going to happen. In terms of carbon price, in 2018, getting to 2 degrees was a $225 marginal carbon price. Getting to 1.5 degrees was a $6,050 carbon price marginally, right? So we went down this route, everybody signed up to 1.5, and they still bang on about it, and investors are still demonized if they don't talk about 1.5. Nobody's brave enough to say, you know, it was, I don't want to call it a mistake, but the decade of 1.5 as the target, and the only target, and the only one we're empowered to talk about, so that if you go along and say, why don't we propose for this state, or this, you know, for Hawaii, or for whatever, why don't we propose a 95% solution that we can do fast and cheap, right? And if you just get pushed back, that's not 1.5 compatible, we've got to move on from that and say, do you know what, well, how about we do a lot of electrification fast, and we don't demonize people if there's a little bit of fossil that they simply refuse to, you know, engage or they can't remove.
Okay, maybe I go back to the supply chain components that you did mention about. I think earlier we had some breakout group discussions, and supply chain and trade was one of the key pillars. My question to you, Michael, is that what are the roles then of industrial policies to create this diversification of the supply chain? Should it be kind of a top-down approach, or should it be left to the market to decide the diversity?
I think if you leave it to the market will buy the cheapest things. You know, it's all very well to, in the US or elsewhere, people say, oh, you know, we've got to have security of supply, rare earths and so on. Well, fine. If you want to buy, I have an investment in an electric magnesium process. If you want somebody to buy clean electric magnesium made in America, then you have to force them to spend more on their magnesium. I'm talking about steel makers or whoever. If there's no regulatory push, if there isn't a push to do that is forceful, then the purchasing director for that steel company is going to say, well, I can pay, I don't know what the price is of magnesium, I can pay $6,000 or I can pay $9,000 and I'm going to pay $6,000 or I'll get fired. So I think it has to be done with, in partnership with governments, but also it has to be done in partnership with other industry players and other, you know, government to government, because I spoke at a conference, a transportation conference in Brussels, and there was panel after panel. We have to make batteries in Europe. We have to make batteries in Europe. Did you see what happened to Northvolt? You know, they tried to do batteries in Europe and couldn't make the batteries, and it was the scrap rates, the waste rates were too high, and the thing went bankrupt. When I finally, you know, kind of got the microphone, I said, well, first, I'm not sure that you have to make the batteries. So the battery feels like a commodity to me. I don't think the consumer cares where the battery is made. What they really want is very, very good software, which, by the way, you know, we're not very good at yet. But also, so, you know, it's much more than just batteries alone will not save the European car industry. What saved the UK car industry back in the day was that Nissan came and built a huge factory in Sunderland. Nissan Sunderland saved the UK car industry, which is very vibrant, very good at high tech around Oxford, very good at Nissan. There's a whole bunch of factories, you know, minis and so on. What saved it was the Nissan factory in Sunderland. And I said to these people in Brussels, well, maybe what you need is a BYD factory in Wolfsburg, which is where the VWs are made. And there was this gasp, because I dared to say that. But we're going to have those sorts of partnerships. And, you know, you see CATL, for instance, investing in Hungary. I think it's a $4 billion investment. It's very uncomfortable, right? There are real security and real geostrategic issues with that sort of relationship. And having cars driving around, and they just discovered, for instance, in Norway, that the cars are filming and they're sending data back. I'm just going to say we don't know where, but we do know where. And so there's real issues to be responsibly managed. if they're responsibly managed, then the answer is government to government and then private sector to private sector, and we can do this. Right? We've done it repeatedly with other players in other industries.
Any reflections to that comment or anything else about supply chain?